1960s were a decade of dramatic change and deep contradiction. In the United States, in the early years, the election of John F. Kennedy in 1960 brought a sense of youthful energy and hope. He promised to modernize America and tackle lingering poverty in the Cold War global context. Especially events like the Cuban Missile Crisis gave the decade a sense of urgency and risk. At home, the civil rights movement uh, ac- accelerate, acc- accelerated. There we go. Dramatically, students-led sit-ins, freedom rides, and large-scale marches challenged segregation and discrimination head-on. The movement's successes, such as the March on Washington, 1963, where Martin Luther King Jr. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Delivered his "I Have a Dream" speech, which prompted landmark legislation, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. At the same time, President Lyndon B. Johnson launched his Great Society, an ambitious domestic agenda aimed at ending poverty and racial injustice. Programs such as Medicare, Medicaid, educational funding, and food stamps followed from this push. Meanwhile, the U.S. involvement in the Vietnam War escalated. War began as advisory involvement turned into full-scale war. As troops and casualties grew, domestic oppositions and cultural resistance increased. The war became a major backdrop for protests and generational conflict. Culturally, the 60s birthed new movements beyond race, the rise of feminism, Native American activism, Chicano rights, and the environmental movement, and youth counterculture challenged traditional norms of authority, gender, race, and consumption. Cities faced riots triggered by deep frustrations with inequality and police brutality. Even though major legal strides were achieved, many structural problems remained. In short, so basically, the 60s were a time of hope and high ambitions. Civil rights gained meaningful ground, domestic reforms, expanded government's role, and cultural barriers began to shift. But also but also of conflict and disillusionment. The Vietnam War, urban unrest, the limits of reform, and generational division showed that change was harder and messier than many hoped. The decade reshaped America, yet left many questions unanswered.